So to start, psychology started as early as ancient Greece and China with people like Confucius and Aristotle talking about the nature of body and mind. But modern psychology started with a man named Wilhelm Wundt, who was the first modern psychologist. The earliest theories about psychology were structuralism, thinking about the smallest parts of the mind, and functionalism, how everything works. But psychology isn't all just thoughts and theories, it's also about matter. To keep it blunt, the brain is where most of your thought is taking place, and it has several parts to do your thought, and here are some of the main and important areas. The limbic system helps your drive for food and sex, brainstem helps with your survival reactions, the corpus callosum connects your two hemispheres of your brain, and the cerebral cortex is the main control area. The brain also helps with your five senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. You probably know what all of these do, but here's some of their characteristics. Sight's characteristics are the hue, intensity, wavelength, and saturation of light. Hearing's characteristics are the frequency, pitch, amplitude, and intensity of a sound. Touch uses vibration and heat and neurons to send a signal through a body. Taste has 5 different types, including sweet, bitter, sour, salty, and umami, commonly known as spicy. And I'm pretty sure you know how smell works. The 5 senses also alter your sense of perception. Perceptions have 2 different types of cues, monocular and binocular. Monocular cues are cues that provide depth when only looking with one eye. Some examples include relative size and interposition. And binocular cues are like monocular cues, but you can see them with both eyes. Some examples of binocular cues are retinal disparity and convergence. Perception cues is what makes optical illusions, such as the Necker cube right here. You can see the cube through the lines. This is called selective attention. There are many more cues and illusions, but those are just examples. Sleep is one of the most important parts of your everyday lives. But sleep is much more than just a mental stabilizer. Do you ever have a feeling where you can't fall asleep for one reason or another? It's normal. It's just part of the sleep cycle. The sleep cycle has 5 different stages. Stage 1 is where you're bordering sleep and awake. Stage 2 is where you have high bursts of energy while sleeping. Stage 3 is where you start to slow down and start to dream. Stage 4 is when you are in deep sleep. And REM stage is when your body is relaxed, but your brain is super hyper. All these stages have different levels of consciousness. The conscious, where you're processing information around you, the subconscious, where the information below the subconscious resides, and the unconscious, all the things below your memory. All these memories from your conscious levels are in your dreams, which can symbolize something you want, more Freud, or just your vivid imagination, or REM dreams. Much like dreams and sleep, memory is another thing that makes your everyday lives. Memory has 3 levels of memory storage: sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. When your memories are stored, you can retrieve them anytime using retrieval. But to keep those memories, you need to condition yourself to remember those things, whether it be classical or operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is a conditioned stimulus and an unconditional stimulus, meeting and creating a conditioned response. An example would be giving a dog a treat whenever you teach them a trick, and when they do the trick, they expect a treat. Operant conditioning is conditioning via punishments and rewards. An example would be giving a toddler a cookie when they're on good behavior. Next is intelligence. Everybody probably knows the limits to how smart they are, but do they really know? IQ, or intelligence quota, is tested through the IQ test and is measured through 11 different aspects. But it could also be tested through the aptitude test, which predicts the individual's learning capacity. But to make sure that the test is good, you need to make sure that the test is valid, standardized, and reliable. And just like every other unit's theories. The theories of intelligence is the debate with multiple versus general intelligence. General intelligence is the theory that your intelligence is based on one factor, and multiple intelligence is the opposite, where your intelligence is measured across multiple factors. But if you aren't as smart as you'd like to be, motivate yourself. There are 2 types of motivations: extrinsic motivation from the outside and intrinsic motivation from the inside. The theories of motivation are instinct, drive reduction, arousal, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and expectancy theory. Instinct theory is where behavior is done naturally and driven by your instincts. Drive reduction is where your body creates an unpleasant stimulus and it drives you to get rid of it. Arousal theory is where your body wants to keep an optimal level of arousal. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is where you need to satisfy your needs to feel self-actualized, and expectancy theory is where a person gives an effort for a reward, like the greater the effort, the greater the reward. Other things that motivate you are basic everyday occurrences like hunger, stress, and social interaction. Motivation is part of your everyday life, just like most of the other things we have covered, like emotion and personality. The theories of emotion are James Lange, Cannon-Bard, and two-factor. James Lange is psychological activity creates emotional experience. Cannon-Bard is where emotional experience happens at the same time as arousal, and two-factor is where physiology and cognition creates emotion. The things that control your emotion and personality are the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the child that needs everything at its fingertips. It controls your desires, and the ego is your rational self and the one that is most apparent on surface level. And the superego is your values and needs to be perfect in front of everybody. All of these develop through your infancy and mature throughout your childhood. Some of these stages in which they develop are the oral phase, the anal phase, the phallic phase, the latency stage, and the genital stage. Once you mature, you get out of these phases and start to feel anxiety during social situations. That's where defense mechanisms come in. Defense mechanisms are techniques to prevent the individual from developing anxiety. You may have seen these on TV shows, but here are some examples. Projection is where an individual attributes impulses from your problems onto somebody else. And repression is where you push your thoughts down onto the subconscious. There are more, but those are just some examples. Next is development. The stages of development are premarital, childhood, adolescence, and adult. First, premarital development is how you develop while still being born. To make things simple, the sperm and the egg fuse and make a zygote, and then the zygote attaches the cells to the uterus, makes an embryo, then the embryo grows into a fetus. Next, childhood development is how you develop at a younger age. Childhood development is all about how learning the world works, knowing who you can trust, and motor development. Adolescence development is development when you're in your teenage years. During this time is where you mature bodily through puberty and socially through social interaction. And lastly, adult development is your final stages of development starting at your early 20s. Adult development peaks during the mid-20s, then starts to decline. Your physical development starts to decline after peaking, and same goes through your cognitive and social development. Another thing to watch out for during adult development is diseases. Adults are less likely to catch the common cold, but are more likely to attract more damaging diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia. Almost done, and moving on to social psychology. Social psychology is the thought of what happens during social situations. Attribution is our first example. Attribution is an example of someone's behavior that connects to the inside, internal attribution, or the outside, external attribution. Next is attitude, and everybody hears about attitude from their mom or their dad. Attitudes are beliefs and thoughts about certain objects, things, and events, and has three components: cognitive, affectionate, and behavioral. All of these are behaviors of social situations, but what about group social situations? Group dynamics are behavioral changes while in a group. While in a group, people tend to do different things such as be more lazy, more active, tend to do better or worse, or etc. Lastly, we have disorders and treatments. Psychological disorders are mental oddities and diseases about your behavior. Some examples include bipolar disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders. Mental illnesses are the same as other disorders, but are way more common. Some examples are depression and anxiety disorders, which are up to 10% of Americans some years. Personality disorders are disorders that hinder your social interaction because of your set personality. Some examples are borderline personality disorder and the schizophrenic spectrum. But if some disorders are too much for you, then get yourself some treatment. Biomedical treatments are treatments through medical methods such as drugs and surgery, while psychological treatments are treatments through interaction and social conditioning.